And we are back on Live Action Roleplay after a long hiatus. This is Ryan, one of the hosts for the show, and I'm here at the editing booth with some notes for this particular episode of Live Action Roleplay. This was Kai's idea for him to interview me on the Blank Slate Deep Dive, which is an intense look at the creation, the inspiration, and all of the different elements that went into making this live stream LARP show. And it's a black box live stream LARP, and that explanation is given into the show. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Sin to join us because she had other obligations that night, but we're going to try to make more content at least once a month while I'm still working on the show Blank Slate. It just takes a while for Kai, Sin, and I to coordinate. So, again, we're going to try to do this once a month. I want to thank our Patreon supporters for making all of this possible. When a lot of the podcast did not go out, you were very supportive while we created Blank Slate, and I really appreciate that. I want to give out shout-outs to our Patreon supporters, such as the Eyes of the World. So thank you for collectively being involved with being in chat and also making sure that we're supportive. So I couldn't actually do a lot of this stuff without my Patreon supporters, so thank you. I also want to thank Talon Hack Bowler, Aaron Ludlow, Faye Leung, Sam Sanchez, Vivid Vivka, and Twin Mask LARP. Again, all of you are superstars. Thank you so much. This is going to be a long episode because we got really deep into all of the different seasons and many different facts that you may not have known about making this show. The one thing I will say is that people have been asking, when will this be on YouTube? And we are actually working on that with the studio. So we know that that's pretty priority for us before I can actually make more episodes, and you'll understand why. So without further ado, playback.
And we are live. Welcome to Live Action Roleplay with
Ryan Omega
and Kai Norman. So we're spinning things up a little bit differently here. Some role reversal. Because, well, Ryan, you've been working on some very, very exciting things for most of this year, haven't you?
I have been working on Blank Slate a lot. Almost too much.
Yeah.
But too much is not a bad thing in this case because I really like doing this show.
Okay, so for those listeners who have never heard of Blank Slate, what do you think is the... how would you, as carefully and as simply, describe what you do with... What is Blank Slate?
So Blank Slate is a black box LARP on livestream that is a cross between Game of Thrones meets The Sandman meets Kingdom Hearts.
Okay.
That is the most succinct description of the show, which is really, really weird, but it makes people go, huh? What?
Well, I'm going to first up ask, what is a black box LARP?
So I call it black box LARP because it all takes place on a single stage. And a lot of the LARP interaction is based on narrating scenes, but the players have the player agency that you would find in a LARP.
So a little bit like a stage and a theater thing, but also, the gaming aesthetic, and maybe even a little bit of like improvisational classes or like improvisational performances, maybe. Definitely
inspired by improv theater, also mixed with the LARP mechanics of gaming, and the reason why I came up with this idea was LARP is difficult to replicate on screen without you physically experiencing it. So a lot of the problem with trying to do LARPs in the past, when it was pitched to me, let's do a LARP show, often one of the things that would either happen, because it's a reality TV program, is they wanted to either look at it through a microscope and make fun of it, or make fun of the people who were in it, or they didn't understand what was really needed for LARP, because they always wanted to look at it from an outsider perspective rather than participate. And the other problem that people would pitch to me constantly is, well, just have several GoPros and attach it to several players. The problem with that is that you can have 16 cameras attached to different players, but that doesn't tell a story when you look at it on screen, and that became a problem. So how do you manage to tell a story in a round that people can look at? And that's to narrow the focus to a single screen. In this case, it would be a single stage, but have scenes that people can look at, and then when it's time to introduce new elements or different scenes, you switch that scene by narrating scenes in and out.
Now, I suppose the next logical step might be maybe for you to describe the stage. Like, what were your goals that you needed to achieve with it, and how did you tackle any kind of problems that you came across with it making this stage?
So I guess I should start with, how did Blank Slate start off as a concept?
I like that one even more.
So originally it was supposed to be a modified version of a Dungeons & Dragons game. And I actually, and my playtesters were a couple of my friends, including Ruben Bressler, because he is a DM himself, but he doesn't get to normally play a D&D game. And I said, okay, come over to my house and I'll run some games. And the concept that I had was everyone had a composition book with 20 pages. And I told them, okay, page 1 is your name and page 20 is what you actually are, but you all have amnesia. Write any 3 powers that you want on 3 of the pages. And when we started creating this game, I kind of did my normal DM style, which is a little bit more LARPy, because I do believe in the whole collaborative storytelling thing. It started off with a few of these players not knowing where they were, and I asked them, okay, what room are you in? And when they see a dead body, describe the dead body. When they find an item, I tell them, describe the item to me. And we build this world together. And it was a very intense 4-game session where everything was very yes and. And you rolled d20s when you were trying to deal with situations like investigation or dealing with enemies. So that part was normal. But if you rolled a 20 or you rolled a 1, then I made you roll a d20 for unlocking a memory on one of those pages. And
that's quite a bit different from how you actually ended up executing it on Twitch, wasn't it?
Yes, it really was. But so I really liked this idea, and I thought this would be an experimental D&D game. When I pitched this to Knox over at Scabby Rooster, I actually talked to 5 different studios who wanted to premiere this concept. But of all of the studios, Scabby Rooster was the one that was willing to work with me the most. Knox said this idea was good, but can you make it a LARP? Because we're trying to do something more LARP-related in our channel. And I thought, oh, wow, I was not expecting that at all. And I said, I need a week to just redesign the entire concept to make it fit what we were going for. And Knox and Fabi and Scabby Rooster threw their resources behind it. They bought more cameras. They worked with me on a layout. They made sure the stage was clear. One of the things that Knox suggested is, I want a show that has no table, because every other tabletop live stream role-playing show has a table, and what will make Blank Slate distinct is having no table.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much almost every roleplay game that's getting streamed is just people sitting in front of a camera.
Yeah. And the other thing that I stipulated is I wanted my system to be diceless. And that was kind of inspired by Bruce Monarch, because Bruce and I, when we created our LARPs together, including Hollywood Forever LARP, the thing that we wanted was a diceless system. So when I combined what Knox had to contribute and an idea from Bruce's LARP, we ended up with something that was kind of very nebulous, but was Blank Slate. That system or that scenario that I described to you, that was the premise for season 1, that the few characters woke up with amnesia. And they were describing everything, and everything was very yes and. But then I had to create a whole bunch of NPCs at the time that knew what was going on, and there had to be an overlay of a political murder plot that was happening. So that part was new. And originally they were all supposed to be NPCs. However, because they had the advantage of knowing backgrounds and having things, like a lot more of the audience was kind of drawn to them. But with the amnesiacs, they had a much tougher time because they had to deal with nothing and eventually learn about their backgrounds.
Now, if I recall, the amnesiacs were your intent for being the main focus, kind of the heroes in the story, essentially, yeah? Mm-hmm. Do you feel that was achieved, or do you think that maybe some of the gameplay that you kind of created with these idea of the amnesiacs, do you feel it was more the audience kind of viewing them as heroes, or maybe self-inserting, because a character that has no potential background could be potentially anyone?
Mm-hmm. I thought that they
or something else.
Well, I kind of thought that they were more self-inserting. I wanted the perspective to come from those who had amnesia. Mm-hmm. So they were the protagonists because you could, A, insert yourself, and B, you knew nothing about the world either. So you could identify with them having struggles. But what ended up happening was I think more people were interested in the level of politics that was going on, as well as those who were suffering from amnesia, because there's a mystery to be solved there.
Now, you talk about the mystery. That became kind of the larger plot of the that whole first season, really. Mm-hmm. It started with a murder.
Right.
And then kind of exploded out from there in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. Have you ever ran or played in one of those more jovial kind of like dinner party murder mystery games that sometimes people run?
You know, surprisingly, I haven't. I've never played in a dinner mystery or murder mystery. I would love to, just never have.
So I've played in one before, and fortunately it was run by someone who put a lot of effort into it, because they kind of wrote a little bit of backstory for each character and kind of wrote in an ally, as well as someone who was your direct enemy. And most people knew who their ally was, but not everyone knew who their enemies were. So you would have someone that you didn't like, but that person might not necessarily perceive you as an enemy. There might be someone else who is trying to get a knife in your back. And that was a lot of fun, but it was, just a couple of hours, and it was much more kind of, at the end of the game, kind of like Werewolf or Mafia, if you played either of those little kind of social games. Everyone kind of pointed at one person, and it was a mass vote, and whoever got the highest vote was who everyone believed to be the murderer. And unfortunately we didn't win. The murderer got away with it. But that was always really interesting to me, and it definitely felt like a LARP to me. But how would you say that what you created, I mean, I saw a couple of similarities, but especially, how would you define some of the differences between those two types of things?
Well, In season 1, I made it accidentally much harder on myself by making sure that the audience was involved. Like I gave the premise of the audience can determine who the murderer is. And that affected things because I had to leave things loose enough for certain people to have been the murderer.
Now, when did you give the viewers, the audience, the people watching on Twitch, correct? Mm-hmm. When did you give them the chance to actually choose the murderer?
So what I did first was in the first episode, I gave them the choice of, is it a PC or an NPC? Mm-hmm. And they chose an NPC. So it wasn't one of the amnesiacs that did it.
So it's one of two groups that they got to decide between.
Right.
Okay.
And then there was a second thing. It's been a while, so I don't exactly remember. There was a second element that kind of narrowed things down. So what I was trying to do was take the whole cast, ask pointed questions that was either A or B with the chat, and then have them narrow it down. Mm-hmm. So by the time we got to episode 3, there were only 5 potential murder suspects.
Now, how many episodes did you do this first season?
I only did 4.
Uh-huh.
And that was because I didn't know if this concept would work.
Of course.
So I thought, okay, if this concept didn't work, then, I tried something and then I'll be done with it.
So with you talking about the concept of like, I don't know if this is going to work. Mm-hmm. It actually reminds me a little bit of the author Neil Gaiman.
Oh, yeah.
Because in one of his speeches, I might have mentioned it, this speech before. I recommend all of our listeners check it out. It is on YouTube, and it's called Make Good Art. Mm-hmm. It's about a 20-minute graduation kind of speech that he gave to, I believe, an art school. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in this Make Good Art speech, Neil Gaiman talks about how he had some jobs that he did, some books that he wrote, that he did just for the money. Mm-hmm. And they were almost never good experiences for him. And then he had some that he was absolutely positive would do really well, kind of fall on their face. Mm-hmm. And over time, he has always kind of said that when you create something and send it into the world, you don't know what's going to happen with it. Mm-hmm. And some of his biggest successes were ones that he thought were going to be failures. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's kind of a little bit exciting to actually create something and try and see if it actually flies in the real world. Mm-hmm. And if you knew something would be a guaranteed success before you even attempt it, where's the fun in creation of that? Mm-hmm. Now, you said sometime during episode 3 or 4, things kind of narrowed down to a group of about 5 people on the cast. But our cast was a good, 14 or even 20 people, wasn't it, for the first game?
We were 13 people.
Yes, okay. And of that, 4 of those were PCs. Mm-hmm. So there were 9 left that could have been the murderer.
Right.
And then you were able to pretty much halve that down with a few questions to the viewers. Mm-hmm. How and when was the final decision on who the murderer was decided?
So the final decision was decided by chat. Mm-hmm. They were given the different people that could have done it, and then we just took a straight vote, which was hidden from everyone, and then it was revealed to me who did it. And so the moment I found out who did it, it wasn't just, we will announce it, and then I have to tell the person, because the person didn't know. Mm-hmm. No one knew. So I had to think of,
and even the voters, your fans who were watching the audience, right? Which you refer to in the game consistently as the eyes of the world. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's the in-character, in-universe way of basically saying, hey, audience, we're talking about you, right?
Right, yes.
I really like that you were able to do that, because it's kind of like fourth wall breaking, but it also sort of isn't if you kind of view it as like a magical element or something.
Yeah, I also didn't like to use the term audience because even though it's true that they're the audience, but if you give them a special title, they'll embrace it. And I thought if you want to make anything special, you give it a name and a designation, and that is not that is your own. And if I just said to my audience, it also feels like I'm in a circus, which for a blank slate is kind of true, but
it definitely felt like a circus at times.
Yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't feel special. So I need to come up with something that I could address the audience with, and I kind of really liked it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so we talked about that aspect. Mm-hmm. I would be really interested because no doubt some of the fans of the show are probably interested in the creative process of all of this. Now, the fans, the eyes of the world, didn't even know their own votes, did they? So the group of voters, some of them were voting, and it was a blind vote. So no one knew how many all of the different groups got. So that poll was completely hidden. The poll results were completely hidden from everyone.
Correct.
Got it. So at the end of it, I believe at the start of the show, everyone had code names. Mm-hmm. And one of the audience participation things that they could do, I think you know where I'm leading to. Could you explain that real quick?
Yes. So one of the important elements to me, and I mentioned this earlier, is I wanted the chat, the audience, or the eyes of the world to be involved somehow. And that's to fix a problem that I have seen in other shows. Like, I know that in Maze...
What's Maze?
Maze Arcana.
Got it.
So being a producer on Maze Arcana, one of the things that was a policy was that the players were meant to only really talk to their DM and not really interact with the chat, because what ended up happening is you didn't want to placate or play to the audience.
Yeah.
It was more important to have an honest moment.
And embrace the story.
And embrace the story. However, for something like this, I wanted to involve the audience somehow. And it's because we were on Twitch. Twitch is meant to be an interactive medium. But I thought it was very weird that many D&D shows didn't embrace the interactivity of that platform, because that's what it's meant for. So I thought, how can I actually break that fourth wall and involve people? And the easiest way to do it was to have them determine the murderer, but also to name the characters. And I thought, if you have the capacity to name the character, then not only does it mean something to the person who donated for that name, it also meant something to the player that meant, oh my god, I did a good job. And to a lot of the players, it did feel like a rite of passage to be named by the audience or by the eyes of the world, because that meant that someone out there was compelled to donate on your behalf to give you life, to give you breath. And that's why every name that people get is like, I always try to make sure I use, because that's their name now. They had a code name before, but they now have a new name. So in your case, it was Gideon, and it's a really cool name. For our viewers, listeners. So for those of you who are enjoying the podcast and haven't seen Blank Slate, one, shame on you. You should check it out. And two, I was playing in the first season of this, and I played a character known as Pretender. I was an NPC, and the role that Ryan had cast me in was I was supposed to be next in line for the throne, because this murder mystery had to have high stakes. So obviously a member of a royal family had to die. So my character was supposed to be next in line for the throne, but for some reason the current ruler, who ended up getting murdered, they were granted the position of
king or queen in the case, they were given the power instead of my character. And so that was definitely a loaded role. And later, the Eyes of the World ended up paying some money and deciding to name him Gideon, which to this day, it's got to be one of my more favorite names that I've ever had for a character. And I didn't even pick it, which was quite a cool experience. I will absolutely agree with Ryan on this, that being named is a weird, surreal experience, but at the same time, it's very fun, and it's definitely a different kind of spin on things. Now, with the murderer, if you wouldn't mind, maybe telling us not just who the murderer was, who was voted the murderer, but also who the runner-up was.
Ah, okay.
Because I don't believe anyone knows who the runner-up was. And that might be a nice little tidbit for our Blank Slate fans.
Yes. So the murderer, as determined by the Eyes of the World, was Gideon.
Yeah. So I ended up killing, oh boy, my aunt, the queen. Wow. And
the runner-up was Gunther.
Amazing. Gunther is played by Wes Johnson, and he is pretty well known. He used to do a show on Smosh Games, didn't he? Yeah. So he had a lot of fan base that were really rooting for him, and he has an amazing, very flamboyant, fake German accent. So he's quite a character. I love all of that. That is amazing. Now, but this isn't about Gideon, and this isn't about how I was playing. This is about how you were running things. So we've talked about the stage. By the way, how many cameras did you guys end up using for your games?
So for season 1, we used 4 cameras.
What were those 4 shots? Roughly.
So roughly, one was an overhead shot.
Yep.
And then one was a storyteller box shot. So it's a close-up about chest high.
Why is that camera frame particularly important for the show?
Because many dungeon masters or game masters for their shows have a box for them, so that if they narrate the action, they have a central place to do so.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And while that is kind of in line with how most D&D or role-play game, D&D and RPG are kind of synonymous right now. But yeah, so most pen and paper RPGs on Twitch do have, as you said, that frame showing the Dungeon Master. So you decided to keep that and allow the storyteller, which is actually played by you. So you kept that, and then the rest of the show was it 1 or 2 at a time those cameras were being focused on?
So we had 2 other cameras in the first season, but we had dock switching.
Gotcha.
So the reason why you could see multiple cameras is because of the setup in the Scabby Rooster, but then we also have a director switching between cameras so that the Eyes of the World could see the best possible angle. But also we have to keep in mind that people can move, and so therefore switching has to happen at the same time.
Yeah. And that's very, very true. When we were playing, a lot of the times when we first started playing this game, we took quite a bit of time before game, making sure that we learned about the different camera locations and trying to make sure that at least one camera angle was always kind of an optimal shot, so we didn't have someone's head in the way of a camera.
Yes.
So no blocking, which felt much more actor than necessarily player. Only in that frame, though. We had to make sure that we were framed properly, but then we were just kind of going crazy and writing our own lines.
Also, over the seasons, we ended up having a lot more different angles.
Yes.
So we didn't have to frame people as much, but we did allow some of our crew members to move people so that they were within frame. Sometimes in the middle of the game, I would actually freeze the game just so that we can get everybody into frame and then continue.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned about needing kind of some of your essentially crew members to kind of help pose some of the actors and move them around. But that wasn't the only thing that you needed done kind of in a backstage, four-stage kind of format. What kind of other things did you need people that weren't your, shall we say, actors or players to do? You need things done by other people. What type of things did you need done? And then we can lead into who did that.
Yes. So crew-wise, I needed people. Obviously, we needed like a director.
Yep.
We needed someone to manage props. We needed someone to record what was happening while the actions were happening, so that I had notes to keep track of what items were given out.
So more of like rather than like recording with video, this is more someone making continuity notes?
Yes.
Got it.
Continuity notes. As well as making sure someone was managing people backstage so that people can come out or people are let in. Or someone would come to me if I cannot leave my position or leave what was happening in game. Or people to moderate chat.
Perfect. Now, so I suppose this is a perfect opportunity for us to lead into. You wanted these people to kind of go around and step around the scene, but you didn't want them to get in the way or disrupt the game, did you?
No.
So what was your solution to that?
My solution was to have my crew members dress in black and just move about the stage. Because there was no way with several cameras on us that we could switch out to people so that you don't see them. I just thought, okay, just have them understand that that's a caveat of the game, that people are dressed in black. And it's one of those things that people have done in theater. It's actually a very popular thing in old Japanese theater where people are dressed in black and moving things around because that's what you need. And
I'm reminded about masquerades at anime conventions. People often referred to the crew that would run onto stage in black as stage ninjas.
Yes. In fact, there's that whole popular idea that ninjas were actually dressed as not that. They were dressed as other samurai. But the term ninja was inspired by all of these people in black in theater, because they were supposed to be moving things around and not be seen, even in broad daylight or even in like bright light. And I don't know how true it is, but I do kind of accept that as headcanon because it does make so much sense.
It's also kind of funny that, I mean, in modern day, we have a lot of situations in historical movies or various kinds of form of entertainment. Hollywood, with their portrayal of certain things in their shows, lead people to believe that that is the norm in real life. And more often than not, for example, the way that people fight with swords in movies, that is not how you fight with a sword in real life.
No, like that is choreography.
Or in the 80s, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger like running around, just standing up straight and firing from the hip with his machine guns, while now we look at more like Call of Duty video games or like some of the more tactical kind of like war movies where people are using cover, they're hunching down, they're being very low profile and small profile so they don't get, shot. So I think that's really amusing that essentially the Hollywood of feudal Japan was kind of having that same impact where people just kind of socially started to believe or kind of hat tip towards something like that.
And in this game, it was just, I didn't necessarily want to hide the people that were putting together the show.
Yeah, because they were genuinely helping and really, really contributing to this. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I really like is that you went a step further with them, in fact. Because you didn't just have them moving around and they just weren't there. You added more depth to them even more. And this is one of my favorite things about it. Could you share more about what they are and even their name?
Yeah, so originally the crew will also occasionally play NPCs for me. But episode 3 of the first season...
When you say NPCs, do you mean some of the more like pre-made, pre-planned characters with big backstories,
or spur-of-the-moment characters that I needed to happen? So I needed a guard. I needed a butler. I needed like just a random person to interact with because they are part of that entire world.
So like an extra in a movie then?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. So episode 3, I only had 5 players of 13 that day
that were able to show up.
A lot of my plots could not move. I panicked. I'm like, oh well, there goes my show. I have no idea. They can't even show up for the show, and including like a major plot where a wedding was supposed to happen. And at the time, one of the players was filming elsewhere, and the other player was sick. So I'm like, okay, that wedding that was supposed to be planned can't happen. And I thought an hour before, it's like, I don't have any plans. I don't know what to do. And I talked to CW at the time, who was my narrator. I said, I have this crazy idea because the only way that this could work, I'm going to make my crew, I'm going to bring in my crew and make them characters. Because the only way that I can actually fill that empty space. And I'm just going to call them the Timeless.
And when you say characters, you mean far more than just extras in a movie.
Correct. So not only were these crew people moving things around in crews, but they were like these people that came from another realm and were watching from another realm, interacting from this realm.
Almost like gods or spirits?
Almost like watchers of a sort. But they also interfered with the events. So it added by accident another element, only because I was just trying to figure out how do I fill this with more characters when I didn't have players.
Well, a number of us have backgrounds in theater, don't you? Weren't you a theater kid?
I was definitely a theater kid. Like I was in junior high school, but in college I didn't really do a lot of theater.
Okay.
Yeah.
The main reason I bring that up is because almost every theater kid that I've encountered, myself included, definitely adheres to the concept of the show must go on.
Yes.
And I feel that dungeon masters running RPG games, and especially storytellers and the dungeon masters, essentially game masters of LARPs, are also consistently just thinking on their feet.
Yeah, but it was complicated with the idea of, with a dungeon master, you have a table, and if you need to spur more NPCs, you could come up with them off the top of your head or with a generator behind a screen. As a storyteller for Blank Slate, I don't have a screen that I could hide behind. I can't produce more bodies. So
you were limited by the number of actors or people actually participating in this project.
Yes. So I had to figure out, how do I incorporate more and different people, and that's how I came up with the Timeless, because out of necessity.
And some of those Timeless have really evolved and continue to change. In fact, the Timeless seem to be kind of growing in size more than the number of alive characters, actually. Would you like to extrapolate there?
What's interesting is that over the seasons, we've kind of established that if your character dies, you have the option to become a Timeless. The reason being is that for some of these people, they really, really want to stay on the show.
And help, of course.
And I didn't want to get rid of them just because they were dead.
Yeah.
And so I gave them the option if they want to stay and continue to be a timeless and help around with crew, but also occasionally be put into the show playing random NPCs, then that became a thing. But over time, so certain people ended up having more narrator duties. So, example would be Courtney, where she went from Queenmaker to being named Cordelia.
Obviously, if it wasn't very apparent to the start of this, there are quite a lot of spoilers. So if you are brand new to Blank Slate, be aware that a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing would be spoilers to you, but by and large, I would argue that while I respect if you don't want to continue to listen to this, and we'll probably warn you at the start of the episode as well, we'll just retroactively do that. The journey is far more important than the destination when it comes to LARP. You should always try to make sure that you're enjoying the whole experience rather than doing things you don't want to do just with the intent of getting that magic sword or that love interest or whatever your character has as their final goal. Remember that this is a game, and you should always be having fun and making sure other people are doing the same.
In Blank Slate, so much of the game is journey. I've seen many times where they got what they wanted, and they're like, oh, I got what I wanted, and then they get stuck. Or it's not the thing that they wanted. And so so much of this game is a combination of yes and figuring out that journey.
Wonderful. So, I feel like we've done a good wrap-up on Season 1. I would like to ask, so you had a lot of thoughts and trepidations coming into Season 1, and as, kind of a pilot or an experiment like this, you learned a lot on the journey for it. What do you feel was the biggest thing that you learned about Season 1 that you applied moving forward from there?
The biggest one is that the eyes of the world don't distinguish between PCs and NPCs. They treat every character with their own agency, and that was important for me to realize, because no matter how I may have presented them, ultimately people were drawn to all of the characters and just didn't treat them any differently. So the idea of PCs and NPCs began going away after like the third season.
Yeah. And even in the second season, they blurred a lot. I feel like the NPCs were given more agency, and actually we had several situations in the first game where we discussed kind of the idea of CVC conflict, character versus character with the intent of killing each other. And we had a set of rules in the first season, and those rules changed quite a bit moving into the second season. However, so we're going to start talking about the second season.
Yes.
Now, how many episodes was the second season?
Second season was 6.
So we're going for a little bit more length, which, at least from my perspective, it allows for a lot more things to happen. But were you at all worried that people would achieve their goals too quickly and kind of, as you said, get what they wanted and then run out of steam?
So with Season 2, the premise was that there was a missing prince. And they needed to find this prince and get him to the summit safely.
By summit, what do you mean by that?
I mean that there is a place where the prince was expected to arrive and deliver a message to a congregated group of foreign leaders.
Great. Okay, so you were saying about the prince.
So the premise was going to start off with 4 people and a missing man story. So it's not that these people start off with amnesia. It was they all collectively are trying to find this missing person, meaning that this person wouldn't pop up until later. But as they were going through, I was thinking, oh, they're not going to find this person later. They're actually doing a pretty good job. So I need to present someone to be that person. And I did try to figure out somebody who I can cast. And eventually I found Dakota.
Yeah.
He knew barely anything about Blank Slate, and I thought, okay, I'm going to throw you in here. Hopefully you swim. And he did great.
Wonderful. Okay, so the story continued through season 2.
Mm-hmm.
Now, season 1 had a very strong vibe of a murder mystery,
Right?
Very much like kind of, shall we say, something similar to Clue.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, season 2 was a missing person.
Mm-hmm.
I picked up a little bit of some feelings of almost like a film noir kind of vibe, personally.
Mm-hmm.
But what were some of your inspirations for season 2?
My inspiration for season 2 was actually things like The Fugitive.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's weird because
as a movie,
yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, the weird part is that you're not looking at it from the protagonist's point of view. You're looking at it from the pursuer's point of view. And there was also a lot of yes and building a lot of that world. So a lot of that world had not been determined yet. So I kept that structure from season 1. But eventually it had to lead to something that was important. And I found that people were drawn to the political intrigues in season 1. So I thought, let me continue that in season 2. Mm-hmm. And so the premise was that the prince related to Gideon was, there was a reason why he didn't take the throne.
Because while we say prince, note that a prince doesn't necessarily have to be justified by being a young person who is currently eligible for the throne. The prince was actually Gideon's father. Mm-hmm. And Gideon's father rejected his position and instead gave it to he rejected his position, and the parliament that was running the empire in his stead gave the position to his sister instead of his son, who was the rightful heir.
Right.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a ton of other inspirations. Like, I was definitely inspired by a setting that was different from Slate. So Slate was basically a regular fairy tale land, also kind of mixed with Game of Thrones.
So for clarification here, again, Slate was the name of the city-state that the first season was. Yes. And in the second season, you didn't continue it in the same city. You made an entirely new city, actually, didn't you?
Yes, so it was the city of Petra. And so since Slate was like this kingdom or part of an empire, like this main reason for the empire.
The capital.
Yeah, the capital. And I just called it Slate because I thought that was the placeholder, until I could think of something else. And I thought after a while, I was like, why don't I just keep it as Slate? Because, blank slate. And then with Petra, I started to come up with the convention of naming other regions after rocks.
Which is awesome.
Yes. So Petra was Greek for stone. And so, and I thought that I wanted it inspired by Istanbul. So a place where 3 different cultures met. And it was a place of study.
Wonderful. And
so it was definitely motivated by a lot of that and college towns.
You started engaging in quite a bit of world building in between season 1 and 2, didn't you? Because there was a brief kind of pause between the 2 seasons, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was only 2 weeks.
Yeah, and then as soon as those 2 weeks are over, we were right back into it.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that my brain doesn't... It's not that I couldn't have continued more things in the castle, but I always like a change of pace. Because I also thought of the production standpoint of if people haven't seen season 1, I didn't want them to necessarily get lost and feel like you must watch season 1 to begin to understand season 2. However, what was interesting was bringing back some people from season 1. Because of that holdover, people were definitely interested in what was happening from those characters because they already have an attachment.
Yep.
As well as build up some interest in the newer characters as well. So people who watched the earlier seasons definitely got more benefit from watching. So that definitely was something I did not anticipate, but I should have guessed. So knowing that, there ends up being a lot of things that you will only get from having watched the original season. That kind of feeds into this season, but you don't have to watch it. It's just more extra knowledge for you. So if you're one of those people that really, really likes world building lore, then you kind of want to watch all the seasons.
And you started to utilize some beautiful, really interesting kind of intro artwork that involved. Well, actually, if you'd like to talk about what did it involve, how did you come up with the idea of the intro, and how has it kind of evolved through the seasons?
So I do all of the graphic arts, whether it's the portraits, whether it's the different art, the arts, all the different graphics. Like I do everything. I usually get things from free license sites or things in the public domain. So the picture from the first season is Anne of Cleves. Well, the picture's in public domain.
Yeah.
So it was easy to acquire. And then for the next season, City of Petra, that map is a map from, I think, the 1500s of Spain.
Oh.
And then I put a sword in front of it, and it's actually the same sword used in the season 1 graphic, but just in a different orientation.
Okay.
So, and that was to emphasize a city. And then other seasons had their own treatment based off of what I felt like. I experimented with different art styles after season 2.
So going into season 2, you already decided that you wanted to have a little more focus on the political intrigue. So you created a lot of characters that kind of had differing goals and a lot of potential for the backstabby kind of Game of Thrones stuff.
Yes.
In fact, I would, having experienced and watched episodes in 1 and 2, I definitely feel that 2 is where it really started to actually get that like Game of Thrones kind of vibe, because it was as you were filling out the world and kind of, drawing in areas of the map, as things became quantified, it's like they had more weight and worth behind them. And so the stakes were getting higher and higher, and it made for a lot more kind of tense drama.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, at least on the player side, very, very satisfying. And considering some of the participation that happened in chat with the Eyes of the World, they were also just eating it up.
Yeah.
So going in, were there any other kind of things that you had in mind for stepping into season 2?
So the other thing that I did not realize is that I started creating season 2 before season 1 was done. And I realized for future seasons, I actually have to wait until the season is done. And it's not one of those things where you can pre-plan so far ahead, because everything collides and connects with each other. So when that happened, that meant that, season 2 had more people than I thought were going to be there. So we ended up with a bigger group.
Yeah, because you cast a new selection of players for season 2, but then it made sense for quite a few of the season 1 characters to return.
Exactly. And so that I did not anticipate, but it was also great for the audience, because then they had people that they could connect to.
If I recall, with the naming traditions, almost every character in season 2 ended up with a name, didn't they?
Yeah, I think, or almost all of them.
Yes.
Yes.
And you could very clearly kind of see which of the characters in the story were really kind of getting embraced.
Yes.
We've covered some of the hooks, shall we say, for your starting of Season 2. And if I recall, you had, when you were talking about having things kind of planned and lined up for Season 2 while Season 1 was going, I remember you gushing even about Season 3 when Season 1 was still going on, because you were obviously very excited. And you were diving headlong into the world building. And there was a lot that you wanted to tell us, but also because we're players, there's a lot that, I mean, you couldn't tell us. And to my understanding, most of those ideas that you initially had went right out the window, didn't they?
Yeah. Because as much as I would love to plan a lot of this world, what would usually happen is players would go into a different direction, and I respect player agency a lot. The interesting thing about the end of Season 2 was that I made a decision that I only really thought I was going to implement that night. Because back then, I thought, okay, the players would have a summit, and then something else was supposed to happen. And I realized I didn't know exactly how to implement it. So the only way that made sense in my head is like, well, something has to interrupt that summit. And at first I thought it was going to be a fight. I thought that's the only thing that was going to happen. And I thought, no, it needs to be bigger. And that was when...
Yeah, you picked a bigger thing.
I picked a much bigger thing.
Before we get into the bigger thing and how that continued, I will... I'm reminded about something by what you're saying. If you run a LARP, you really can't be as attached to your story, how you envision it, as some people might be. If you're making a video game, or you're making a movie, or you're writing a book, you have total control.
Yes.
If you're running a D&D game, you can railroad, which is the often referral of people... the dungeon master kind of like all roads lead to Rome. Doesn't matter. I'm just giving you the illusion of choice, but in all actuality, you're doing what I want you to do regardless. And some dungeon masters enjoy that kind of story. Others flourish outside of that. I think LARPing doesn't work in that regard. If you start really railroading, you're taking away the player's agency. And I've paid attention to some of the books and podcasts and other kind of video things that some very, very well-known dungeon masters have always encouraged. And Matt Mercer, Will Wheaton, and others, they all have their different takes and directions of how to do good storytelling. But the thing that I see every time as they're solid, everyone talks about it, is the most important, which is... let your players do what they want to do. Give them consequence for what they do.
Oh, absolutely.
But if they want to play in a game, you need to get a feel for what your players want. And I guess in your case, considering you have an audience watching as well, and they're participating as the eyes of the world, you're also kind of picking up on what the audience wants.
Yes.
And it's your job to balance that in a fair and kind of almost like refereeing or umpiring some of that kind of world creation where you're steering this iceberg flowing down a big rapids. But you don't get to really choose much more than that at times.
Well, I think it depends on certain scenarios. With the eyes of the world, I've learned that if you give them too much choice, they will insert things like Rick and Morty, which doesn't work. Yeah.
I mean, so pop culture references are always going to be kind of, when you want a more serious or immersed game, you never want that kind of stuff to happen. I know I actively discourage it in my LARP, and my LARP is a post-apocalyptic one where people could find some vague remnants of those pop culture references, but even then it's like, if it's modern, maybe not, because your joke can pull people out of their fun.
And I'll take winks to things in pop culture, but I wouldn't take straight pop culture.
Yeah, like a little hat tip there and here and there.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely feel like there's been a couple of like loose Star Wars quotes by some of the characters.
I mean, certain characters are named after Arthurian legends, just straight out.
Yep.
because that's what inspired them. And I thought, if that's what motivates the eyes of the world, then why not give it to them? Because it's not genre breaking.
No.
And some of these things are part of the overall archetypical mythos that we all know.
Yep.
So in several cultures, there are certain gods. There's always concepts of birth and love and death and sex and freedom and imprisonment.
Yeah.
Like, all of these things exist. So for some of these people, even in naming certain people, like, those names have power.
Yes.
For one of our characters, Alistair, the person who named him said that she named him after a folk hero that her grandmother told her when she was a kid. That stories of this man named Sir Alistair. And that's how Alistair got his name.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I genuinely assumed it was something like a Dragon Age reference. So knowing the depth behind that is even more interesting, because obviously Dragon Age had to have gotten that name from somewhere.
Right.
Interesting. Now, so we're wobbling on and going a little off tangent. Let's talk about at the end of Season 2, what was your big takeaway from the end of Season 2, do you feel? Like, what did you learn the most that is, like, the one thing that you're, like, that was the most valuable thing to learn at the end of Season 2?
Most valuable thing at the end of Season 2?
For moving forward, at least.
Oh, for moving forward? Sometimes you need to shake everything up. The end of Season 2 was actually one of the most requested things that people wanted to see. When I asked people, like, what episode do you want to see from the past?
Oh, yeah, because replays happen once in a while, huh?
Yeah. And it was one of the most requested. Because of what happened. A lot of the a lot of huge moments, but those huge moments happened because a bigger moment, bigger than them, occurred, and it's a matter of them surviving and trying to figure out what to do. So
I enjoyed that a lot. Like, it really established kind of some of the madcap kind of stakes of things to move from there. And also this rather nicely kind of rolls into the theming of your theming and ideas for Season 3.
Season 3 was named Gone to War, named after Gone, which is a highly technological type of society. The name Gone, like, people don't necessarily know the reference. So the Japanese word for rock is Ishi. However, a friend of ours has that last name, and I'm like, that would be very awkward. However, the Chinese pronunciation, one of the Chinese pronunciations of Ishi is Gon. So that's why I went with Gon.
Great.
And one of my friends who teaches gymnastics and does parkour, I wanted to bring him in because he's actually a longtime actor. He was a child actor who like grew up, and I had this idea for Articulated, which is the androids in the world, and what would it be like to bring them into the Blank Slate universe. And so for the graphic, in my head, I kind of thought, well, a person who's an android. Just very, very simple. And I just said to Riley, who ended up playing Arthur in the game, Riley, I need you to take off your shirt. Because I need this kind of a photo. And then we just shot just outside of the house.
Okay.
But I modified a little bit of it to kind of like get that impression of someone who was strong, but someone who was made of like parts and gears. But I was really happy with the graphic that turned out, and it looked nothing like the previous seasons. Season 3 was a game of, can you build up technology? And that part was inspired by Civilization, where in that game you unlocked certain technologies in order to build up other technologies. So I created my own version of those boards that the audience Eyes of the World can unlock. So, and these are things that could directly benefit the players. So it was actually super cool to watch them unlock things and have it affect a lot of the plot, because suddenly things like Articulated could talk to each other.
Yeah.
Or ships got repaired. So little things like that began affecting the gameplay. It was actually probably one of my favorite mechanics.
In fact, even more so than that, in previous seasons, we had almost a Hunger Games-like system where not only could you pay to name characters, and some of our Eyes of the World actually kind of started pooling resources, like everyone kind of threw in $1 or $2 here or there in order to like name characters or gift items to certain characters. In a very Hunger Games kind of aspect. Fan favorites definitely got more support and named quicker. And then sometimes their foils, their nemesis, also got that kind of nicer kind of treatment as, in order to have a good hero, you need a good villain as well. And you moved away a little bit from that in Season 3 with that whole tech tree idea. And from the sounds of it, you're pretty proud about how that worked, right?
Yeah.
But you decided not to continue that past Season 3, though.
Yes, because the culture itself was undergoing a technological boom, which is the reason for the tech trees. But it didn't make sense beyond that particular season because also by the time we got to the end of that tech tree, which we actually did get to the end of that tech tree.
Oh, yeah, everything got bought out.
Not everything.
No,
but,
my mistake.
Yeah, but a fair amount did.
Yeah.
That meant that there was no other place for the technology to go. So that's why I couldn't continue the tech tree.
Yeah, because the way you designed it, there are actually, I believe, more choices than there were resolutions. And the players got to, Eyes of the World got to kind of like pick these elements and attributes and combine them in the ways that they wanted them to go, right?
Yes.
And then you and your kind of behind-the-scenes team had to kind of, sometimes on the fly, come up with, oh, well, what does this combine with this create? And then you'd move from there.
Yeah, and even though I mentioned Civilization, it was also inspired by a cell phone game called Doodle God, where you combine certain elements and you get a particular result. So there were 55 potential iterations.
Whoa.
Of which they only unlocked maybe 28.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more they could have unlocked, but they didn't.
That's fun. Now, so one of the bigger themes of Season 3, in addition to some of the goals, you said introducing the idea of android humans and this kind of tech tree aspect. What do you feel were some of the other main themes behind Season 3?
The other one was dealing with the Alpha, which was the big bad in this game.
Establishing a larger threat on the outside that people had to necessarily worry about rather than their own political machinations.
Yes. And so it forced people, whether they wanted to continue their machinations or band together. And as the season wore on, yes, you saw some machinations, but even certain characters were like, I can't pursue my own thing if we're all going to be dead.
Yeah. The enemy of my enemy.
Right. So there was a lot more interesting compromises happening. And in the end, one of my favorite things that I created was a war system, which was narratively based. I was trying to figure out, how do you conduct a war without having everybody have swords and guns?
And smacking each other around, which is the usual common way that LARP solve their conflict.
And also to represent that this is a war. And so I devised a system that I worked with Bruce on, or at least he was my soundboard, to narratively come up with a way to deal with combat. And I also tried to make it diceless, because if we were dealing with a war and then we suddenly had to roll dice, I feel like that breaks the spirit of what Blake Slate was intended for.
Very much. And you mentioned Bruce. We were talking of Bruce Monarch. And I believe he's been a guest on our show before, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
Yes. Just so our readers, viewers, watchers, listeners, there we go. Sorry, people.
Ears of the world.
Ears. Yes. So our delightful ears of the world. We have an episode with Bruce as one of our guests, which is why we refer to him so casually. He himself is a LARP runner and has written some very interesting one-offs or kind of loose-form, short-term campaigns, which has been pretty fun.
Yeah.
However, back on track. So the escalation conflict, kind of an external threat, and also... I suppose moving up to the concept of war in our world, those are all really cool themes. Now, with the resolution of that, by the way, do you recall how many episodes there were in season 3? 6.
Yeah. So after season 2, everything was 6.
Okay, great. So. After the resolution of it, up to you if you want to use spoilers or not, but what do you feel was the biggest takeaway that you used as a tool moving forward from there?
The biggest takeaway was a lot of people really liked Articulated. People love the philosophy of... people being invented and what were their uses, because it became another analog of discussions of, strangely enough, like oppression and form and function and who has rights. And that was not anything I really intended. It just came out.
It definitely became a kind of a very moral... talking point for the show. In fact, so much so, I believe in season 4, which we have just recently wrapped up, one of the bigger goals that I set my character was to try and kind of understand a little bit more about the Articulated, because my character somehow, even though he was a murderer, somehow managed to continue to survive and be in charge of the country. You will have to watch more of the show to understand the exact reasons why, as I don't want to necessarily talk too much about my character. But he did get an injury that resulted in him being, at least from his perception, a little less human and a little more machine, which caused him some internal strife. And, what's a good LARP without some internal drama and self-hate? So he started looking to those who were fully artificial for some understanding and philosophy behind that. And it blew into full-blown discussions over transhumanism, which is a topic that I find interesting just in day-to-day conversation anyway. So that was a lot of fun, but that wasn't in season 3.
No, that was that came later.
Exactly. Now we're getting almost to the end of the show. I will say there were a few things that you decided to do, because normally season 1 through 4 they are very firmly chronologically ordered. However, there are the 0.5s, which are, well, if you'd like to explain.
Yeah. So 3.5 was a bit of an experiment. If you can't tell, I always like experimenting and trying to push those boundaries.
How many episodes were these things?
There's only 1.5 right now. It's 3.5. And so the idea was, one of the biggest feedbacks that I got from previous seasons is that the seasons are so heavy.
Yeah.
They're very, very dense. At first I thought that was a negative. So I thought, okay, let me do a side story that is actually emphasizing comedy. So I thought, okay, an isolated incident that would involve a heist. And so I actually worked with this with Wes Johnson and Dakota Sky Blue, who were my co-writers. And we kind of thought of a 3-episode heist story. that was taking place in Micah, which is the equivalent of Vegas.
And that was another city-state that you decided to create for these purposes.
Yeah. And they were supposed to go over to a foreign area in Walai, and
you mentioned Walai. You're going to have to fill in the audience briefly about what that is.
So Walai is a foreign nation that I've made as the equivalent of Hong Kong and the Philippines.
Okay.
Where they went to the casino to get somebody and then bring them back and smuggle them back into Slate. So it was only meant to be 3 episodes and involved a whole new cast.
Yeah.
And even established characters got to play different characters because they wouldn't be normally in this 3-parter.
Now, we know your naming convention. You're going to have to explain what Micah means.
So Micah is a form of rock.
Yep. And how about Walai? Does Walai mean anything?
So,
considering it's outside of the Empire of Slate, so it doesn't necessarily have that rock theme.
Right. So, a lot of everything within the Slate Empire is named after rocks or iterations of rocks, whether it's basalt or carnelia, which is short for carnelian, or elmas, which is Turkish for diamond.
Oh, I did not know that one.
Yeah. So, so all of the different areas are named after rocks. But on the Empire of Rasa, which is the other side, everything is foreign words for the word blank or empty or void. So the reason why the Empire of Rasa is named that is because it comes from the Latin tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate.
Yes.
So
that's nice. And I do notice, so you have the Empire of Slate, which is kind of where we've been having our story so far. And then, so you've got Slate, and then you've got blank as the other empire.
Right.
That's a nice, fun little hat tip. But it also works in a larger format, so it's kind of a nice Easter egg, as it were.
Yep. Yeah. So Walai is a Cebuano-Filipino word, which is empty or or nothing. So that's why we have like an area called Walai. The only other areas that have been brought up are Kinos, which is Greek for empty, Rien, which is French for nothing. And then there's going to be a little sneak peek is that we're looking at a future season in a place called Embranco, which is Portuguese for blank. But I also really like the name. It's a really solid name, Embranco. It
definitely invokes some immediate kind of high noon sort of like Clint Eastwood kind of like diddle-oo.
Yeah, and that's exactly what that culture is going to be.
Ooh.
It's going to be very Wild Westy.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to future roleplay in that. Now I have to kind of figure out how does this all work.
So we're definitely pretty much at the end of all of this. And we've just wrapped season 4, which has been a lot of fun. And yeah, quite an experience.
Yes. Your fault.
Yeah.
It was so good. I loved what you did. That's why I wrote a whole season around it.
And as Ryan does say, there's a lot of interesting kind of take-arounds, and to avoid spoilers, just because it's a fun one, at the very, very end, basically after the credits, so we Ryan sometimes does prologues. So after you think the whole show is over and all of the cast members have kind of introduced themselves and talked about their socials, at the season closers, there's sometimes that kind of Marvel Disney movie extra scene. And I jumped on the opportunity for one of those in season 3. Very, very quickly, what was your biggest theme for going into season 4, and why did you decide to do this? Because it's definitely way different than how you would previously running things.
Aside from one planned element, season 4 was highly experimental because I came into it with no plans, which is very scary for any showrunner or DM because that means that I had to think off the top of my head all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But that also meant that I was entrusting the players to come up with their own motivations and their own plots in order for them to run it. So it was a huge game of yes and. But that meant that I'm constantly running at the side of my players, making sure that all of their actions worked, but it's still consistent with the last 3.5 seasons.
Well, the vast majority of your players up in Season 4 are already pre-established characters, so they have goals, they have aspirations, and they're invested in the world and immersed.
I didn't actually cast any new people for Season 4 because of things that I wanted the players to work on. We had new people from 3.5 that were incorporated, but so that a lot of the people in Season 4 were not familiar with. But I kind of thought it would be fun to kind of bring them in and see what would happen if they mixed and matched. And it was actually very, very cool to watch those two pieces of the world combine.
Wonderful. Now, some people might kind of say, oh, you just basically, you didn't have a plan and you rushed into it. I have my own feelings on people kind of thinking that, especially when it comes to LARP, because there's a very big difference between running a LARP and, writing a show.
Yes.
And your element is a little bit of both, but would you say more LARP or more show?
For what I do, it has to be equal amounts of both.
Okay.
And that's because you're trying to give players their agency, but it has to make sense to an audience, whether it's the eyes of the world or anybody else. They have to find places to interact, or I have to give them places to interact. When I end things, like when I end an episode, it has to be a cliffhanger that makes sense. When I look at all the threads of all the plots of what players are doing, the timing of when people go completely matters. Because if once an element is introduced, then it's something that another player can pick up that ball and run with it. So the stronger elements you want to put in towards the beginning so that you have a lot more balls that other people can pick up. And yet it's not impossible for some of the players to feel overwhelmed. Sometimes they will see the amount of sandbox and sand and they will go, Ryan, I don't know what to do.
Decision paralysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When everything is laid before you and it could be anything, it's like, I don't know what to do with my character.
Yeah.
So I'll give them ideas, or I'll go, okay, let me try these things. Or usually what I would do is try to combine them or have them meet with someone, and then that inspires them to go with an idea. After episode 3, when that big event occurs, I was actually worried. It's like, oh, well, now I have to come up with a whole bunch more stuff, because I purposely put that event in the middle because I didn't want it to be something at the end that everyone was just building towards.
Yeah.
I kind of figured you have a starting event for people to kind of get their feet wet and have things to do while they work on their own machinations.
Yes.
But after the end of episode 3, several people went to me and said, oh, I now have ideas for these things.
I bet.
And I thought, okay, now that you have ideas, let's go ahead and let them execute throughout. But every single episode, aside from figuring out who was there and what order they went in, I generally had no idea what they were doing. I was often surprised by people's choices, even up until the very end of that season. Like, I was shocked, and my character's deadpan.
Yeah.
So I should not be reacting unless someone tried to break me, like Wes, on purpose.
Yes. So I find that really, really interesting, at least from my own observations here, because what I'm hearing and what I thoroughly agree with here, is that while some people might be like, oh, like Ryan went into this with no plan, there's a very big difference between having no plan and basically pretty much embracing the ideology of your entire LARP. You were a blank slate coming in, but just because you're a blank slate or a blank page ready to be written doesn't mean that is nothingness. What you brought to the table was your experience as a LARP runner, and even more important, which I mentioned earlier, is your ability to listen to the goals and directions that your players want to go in. And that is very, very powerful and very, very important. And at least from my perspective versus your perspective, because you going into it, you're like, I'm going to try something real nervous here. I'm real nervous and I don't know if this is going to work out. But from the outside perspective, you see that decision and it's just like Neil Gaiman says. And it's like, some of your biggest successes are ones that you had no idea looking at were going to be as good as they were, but everyone looks at them from the get-go, or your description, and could talk till the end of times about why that was such a smart idea to go into it. But going into it, you had no idea.
I would say one of the things that's difficult about what I do is that as a game master, it's 80% listening.
Yes.
That's what makes my game very, very different from everybody else. Most people are used to, when they watch a show, that the narrator or the storyteller or game master sets the world for everyone.
Yeah, consuming, essentially.
And what all I do is I mark the chapters, I introduce people, I allow them to do things, and I give them consequences. But I constantly have to listen to make sure that their world is consistent. Because the moment it's not, suddenly you're taken out of the world because, wait, that didn't happen. However, there are also certain reasons why the consequences are not the same. And I have to know why that's different. Because people expect consistency.
Yes.
If there's not consistency, there has to be a reason. And people will pick at it until they understand why. And that becomes a rewarding piece of lore.
The biggest death of a series, in my opinion, that I've seen, or a series, franchise, or whatever, is the longer it runs, the harder it is to maintain consistency. I know a lot of people who love Doctor Who, but absolutely hate the fact that in much of the earlier Doctor Who stuff, it was very firmly established that the sonic screwdriver solves 99% of your problems. However, it is useless against things that are made out of wood, to my understanding. However, I think it was wood. I believe it was wood, yeah. I'm hoping I'm not confusing that with the Green Lantern, because I seem to remember the Green Lantern had a weakness against wood or something like that as well. Yellow. Okay, yes. My mistake. There was someone who was like Gorilla Grodd, with just like ran around beating someone up with a giant tree trunk, and it was like, oh no, wood is my weakness. Anyway, unimportant. My mistake, sorry. But yes, when Moffat started writing content for Doctor Who that started breaking those rules, people went ape. Yeah. No Gorilla Grodd throwback pun there intended. But the death of continuity is the death of a series.
Yes. And the other difficult part, aside from its 80% listening, is, again, I don't have a screen to hide behind. The blank slate that I hold in my hands is not a list of all of the continuity notes. It's just to organize the game I'm running that day.
It's your scratch pad.
Yeah, it's my scratch pad. Like, if you look at it, it looks boring. But it's all it is. It's just a logistical trackpad of making sure that all of my players at least did one scene before intermission and then one afterwards. Or if there was a very particular interesting note that had to happen, or often it's player requests of, I want this scene with someone. That's all it is.
Yeah.
My trackpad is literally player requests.
Yep.
And making sure that players are heard or got their scene so that they aren't waiting in the back. I owe a lot of my game to the generosity of my players because they're often backstage, and sometimes they'll only come out for like 5 minutes for the entire time that they're there.
Yeah, a good 3 or 4 hours, especially because we have roughly an hour of call time ahead of that, so it's from about 7 till 11, really.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I want to be better about that, but it's kind of hard because a lot of it is dependent on story.
We accept that sometimes there'll be games where we're getting pulled on stage for other people's scenes pretty consistently. Other times, we only get maybe like a little bit of screen time. And as long as it's carefully kind of managed in a way that everyone gets a little bit of that nicer limelight, it works out well. And I think for the majority of our player base that we have for the show, that happens. And I think that and a lot more, you have a great deal to be proud of in regards to all of this. And I cannot wait to see how things progress from here. However, that is the end of our time here. This is already going to be quite a monolith of an episode, or a mammoth of an episode. So,
yes.
So, actually, this is about the time that we usually mention our socials. However, to start with, we should probably say our thank yous to the people who support us.
Yes, I want to thank a lot of our people on Patreon who have stuck with us, even though we have not been making podcasts, have been sticking with us through Blank Slate and making sure that we're able to make content that you enjoy. So thank you so much.
So what are your socials? Because I'm the one who's the host this time.
Yes.
You get to do your socials.
All right. So this is Ryan Omega. You could find me on Twitter under Ryan OMGA. You could find me on Facebook and Instagram under Ryan Omega. You could find me on the show Blank Slate and occasionally on Scabby Rooster under twitch.tv/Scabby Rooster. You could also find me on Fine Brothers Entertainment as an adult reactor, so that would be under in YouTube. Excuse me. If you can't tell, I'm still recovering from my super flu.
Ryan is doing great. Probably don't mention the super flu, I guess.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, so for me, my socials are, we run this wonderful podcast. As well as I have the Instagrams and the Twitters and all that type of jazz under Yokai Props, YOKAIPROPS. You can also find the LARP that I run. Presently, it has been on hiatus for a couple of months because we had, unfortunately, a rather dramatic event between our games, so it wasn't something that we were responsible for. But a building burned down on the site that we were using, and we had to go on hiatus while we find a new site. Hopefully, sometime soon, we're negotiating with a few sites, so we're very hopeful that come the new year, we'll be able to take advantage of that and get back and running and start running some wonderful games. We are currently running Dystopia Rising in Northern California. And you can find us on Facebook or on our webpage. Those are very easy to find. You just need to type in Dystopia Rising Northern California on Facebook and you will find it. Likewise, Google is often your friend. So yeah, I think that is about it.
Yeah, that's about it. So we're looking to hopefully make a lot more podcasts.
We'd like to get back into the swing of things.
Yes, we definitely have to get back into the swing of things.
Because we miss you guys, and honestly, we've actually bumped into quite a few people at conventions and other LARPs where people have told us how much they've appreciated some of the insights that we've been able to help out a little bit. So, I mean, if it helps people continue to have fun with LARPs, then, I mean, that's our real goal.
And I'm very flattered whenever I get asked, even just random people on the internet saying, are you making more episodes? And again, I'm very touched by that, so thank you.
And yes, the reason you people who have been asking that are some of the very firm reasons why we are getting back into this. And thank you for being so patient with us. And no episode would be complete unless we get to say goodbye. So bye.
Bye.